Hello, Hero Collectors here. How's it going, everybody? Hope y'all are doing fantastic. I know I am. And today we're doing a bit of a throwback quick-fire review where I'm going to take a look at the 12-inch Marvel Legends Iron Man, Captain America, and Spider-Man. Thank you, Summit City Spidey, for helping me get that Spider-Man. I will leave a link down to his Instagram in the description below. But yeah, we're going to be going over these three Marvel Legends figures. Not going to do articulation segments just because of how large of a figure they are. But I'm going to be going over what I do and don't like with the three of these figures. So without further ado, let's get into it.
All right, let's kick this off and start with the Iron Man figure. Now, this suit design is very modern, but I don't believe it's really based off of anything in particular. And it looks pretty good. I think that being based on just like a general Iron Man kind of armor look, it's got a lot of good sculpting, a lot of good shiny gold that is painted on. Now, I'll get into it in a minute about the bad, but the red plastic is a bit iffy. The arc reactor is really nice. It's actually sculpted in and has like a plastic piece the over the center, so it looks like it's properly embedded in the chest. And yeah, it's just overall painted really well and sculpted really well. I really appreciate everything that went into it. I know a lot of people want to see this kind of turned into a 12-inch Sentinel, like base body, that we could get some Sentinels for our 6-inch collection based off of this figure. And I'd be okay with that. I don't think this is a bad base to start off with. I do have a few nitpicks in terms of articulation, but in terms of sculpting and design, this would be a really good Sentinel if they were to go down that route. I'm really surprised, though, that they didn't repaint this to be black and gold, as was kind of the. It's not. I guess it wasn't as this was coming out, but it was a armor color that was more prominent at the time of this figure's release, and I'm just surprised that they didn't repaint him at the time. But talking about articulation, since I just mentioned it a moment ago, it's pretty decent. There's one point in particular that I think needed to be improved, but the super articulated torso is really nice. I do appreciate giving that to an Iron Man figure. We have yet to see that on a 6-inch scaled Iron Man. He doesn't have butterfly joints, but we only just got that on the 6-inch side, so I'm okay with it not being here. He can do some pretty good poses. I did do the superhero landing pose, and he was able to do that. Lots of good flying and action shots. His neck movement is superb, especially for an Iron Man. He can look up as far as you need. And just to go talk about the helmet for a second, it's very MCU inspired, but still looks good as a comic Iron Man. Again, this is not any armor in particular, but it does take some inspiration from different sources, and MCU definitely influenced the helmet, in my opinion. And just to talk a minute about a few of the other accessories, of course, he does have fists and open palm hands, and then some blast effects that fit this figure, and an unmasked head. And that unmasked head kind of takes us into the bad of the figure. That face paint on the unmasked head is not all that great. He even looks a little chubby. The way it's sculpted is just not the best Tony Stark likeness for comics. So I think that is probably one of the worst parts of the figure. Another really bad part is the ankle articulation. While I do appreciate the effort, what they did is they put a ball joint into the ankle so that like the foot can have all kinds of rocker, and of course there's a hinge on the ball, so it's really good foot articulation, but it's not stable. Like there was a few times where he was just standing vanilla on the shelf, or on the table, I should say, and he would just fall over and knock a few other figures off or just down, and it was a whole mess. And in fact, I have the figure right in front of me as I'm recording this audio, and just setting him down just to look at so I can remember what all I want to talk about, he started to fall over, and I just took him from the shelf onto the table, and the ankles were already giving out. So that it's frankly just it's It's not awful, you can work with it, but it keeps wanting to do it, so it's always fighting against you, and it just becomes a pain, really. And then something I really have not decided on if it's a bad or good yet is the choice of red plastic. It is a kind of metallic, but also semi-translucent, and when you hold it up to light, you can see light through the plastic, and especially in the chest area where it's more hollow on the figure, it does let light shine through. And for a figure that's supposed to be armor that is supposed to be metallic, it kind of works, but also when you have the light shining through, it also kind of throws it off. It doesn't look the greatest. It kind of looks a little cheap. So, I go back and forth on that. It does look good in some areas. I think in the pictures it turned out pretty well, but just kind of standing on the desk, it was iffy. So I go back and forth on that. So overall, this Iron Man is good, but he has some low points. For the time, I think it was a good release. Of course, I didn't get this in 2017. I only got it recently. And I'm going to have to give him a 6.5 out of 10. It's good, not great. It has some fun parts, but really needed some improving in areas. Moving on, let's talk about SpiderMan. Now, this is a mold that I'm familiar with because it has been reused and modified for Deadpool's and the symbiote Spider-Man, which I've already had in hand. So I really knew what I was getting into with this figure. I will say, for all my griping about the Tony Stark unmasked head, the unmasked head on this Peter Parker face is actually really good. It was printed really well and turned out really nicely for a comic Peter Parker. I think that is actually one of the high points of this figure. I also do really appreciate all the hands that this figure came with. He came with the thwippers, the fists, and the wall crawlers. All hands required for a Spider-Man release, in my opinion. All Spider-Men should always come with those every single time. But then I also appreciate that he has an half unmasked head. That's really nice. I did a picture where he's kind of like folding it over his face mid-run, and I always like those kind of action shots. Really comes to life in a way, and I think on this figure it turned out pretty well. I think all the webbing turned out really good, and even the logos. I can't remember if the webbing was done with that coal molding technique that they did with all these figures, but it's all very crisp. Even the printing that's on the arms for the webbing and even the feet, I don't really see any serious blemishes. I guess on a bigger canvas like these 12-inch figures, it doesn't get messed up nearly as much. He does have an actual like silver to the lenses, which is a lot of fun. It's not just a plain white. It's just a little different and brings a bit of a pop to the actual eyes when you're posing this guy around. The blue is kind of dark, but I don't think it's too bad. I'm okay with some darker blue on my Spider-Man, but I do like the brighter blue on occasion. I don't think it's really a takeaway on this figure at all. I'm just really discussing the color choice, of course. And with all that, I think the only bad on this figure that's serious is the hip articulation. He does not get very wide stances, hardly even 90 degrees with both legs spread out, and that really affects posing a Spider-Man figure in the dynamic poses. I'm able to get him into superhero landings and some crouch poses, but you can't get him into the really wide stances, the landing on a building type thing, or landing on the ground and doing the high knee kind of pose, if you know what I mean. It just really affected posing him in dynamic ways, and it's a pretty significant point. So it really brought this figure down for me, because he is at a 7 out of 10, just above Iron Man. Is still a fun figure, and I'm very glad to have it. It's just that hip articulation needed to be a lot better, and that was present on the symbiote Spider-Man, of course, but yeah, for a classic Spider-Man, I mean, for any Spider-Man, it needs to be more than that. Now, moving on to Captain America. This is actually a funny instance. I had the Super Adaptoid figure before I ever picked this guy up, and Super Adaptoid uses most of this mold. But I actually think the Super Adaptoid's a better figure overall, but I'll get into that in a second. I think the sculpting's fine. It's trying to kind of give that feel of MCU, more the Marvel Now Captain America look from the comics, which I don't hate that look. It's more militaristic, more realistic, I suppose. And here it's got some extra paint detail like on the knee pads and just in certain areas. It's really sculpted really nicely. There's a lot of good textures, like the honeycomb armor, the fabric texture on the abdomen. He's got little patches and whatnot that just have different textures, and it's all painted, all molded, all sculpted really well. The shield is really nice. It's big. It really covers him up a lot, and it's sculpted really nicely, painted really nicely. There's not a lot of paint defects on these figures. I think, again, it's a lot bigger of a canvas, so that's going to happen less and less. And he does have a really good presence. It's Captain America. He should always be commanding your shelves a little bit when he's standing amongst his fellow action figures, so I'm glad it does have that. He did come with a few accessories, mostly just grip and fisted hands, and a helmet to go with his unmasked head. And going back to what I said about Iron Man, the unmasked head for this Captain America figure is really bad. He's got side eye to the max. I mean, even the helmeted head has a lazy eye. The eyes just were not on point this day for this figure, which is a real shame. And another point in the bad column are the shoulders. Now, he has these extra detail bits where it's got like a star armor on the shoulder itself that can move up and down on a hinge. But of course, when you go to move the shoulder up itself, the shoulder runs into the body, or that armor bit runs into the body, and of course limits the articulation, and it is a real pain in the butt. But other than that, those are my real gripes. They do bring the figure down quite a bit, but it's still fun. This whole line is really fun. I'm only missing a few characters from it now, but even the duds of the line, I think Captain America is one of the duds, is still a fun figure to have. Some points that I'm a little indifferent about: the storage system for the shield. When you don't want it on his arm, you have to pop out the star on the back with the star on the front. It's just like a button you press in. It's just weird. I get it's kind of like a play feature, but it's just odd the way that is done. And then the shield itself, the straps you have to attach while it's on the arm, and it's not the most secure of connections, and it bothers me a little bit, but those aren't serious problems with the figure. I think it still works despite those issues, because you don't have to take the star out of the back, and as long as you don't fidget with the shield while it's on the figure too much, it stays pretty secure. So with all of that being said, the good, the bad, the indifferent, I'm going to give this Captain America a 6 out of 10. He's the lowest of these three, and probably the lowest of all the 12-inch Marvel Legends figures I have in my collection currently, but I'm still not upset about owning him. He's just got some issues, but it's still a fun experience if you like this 12-inch line. But those are just all of my thoughts on these kind of throwback figures. I mean, I say throwback, they're 7 years old at this point, which doesn't feel like a lot when you were coming into Legends at this time like I was, but it adds up. But these are still fun figures. They have stuff that I wish that they were doing in the 6-inch line more often, like giving all characters a super articulation. This was, I guess, kind of the testing ground for that, but little tweaks here and there would have made these really, really good. Otherwise, they're still fun. Fun is a huge part of collecting, and these figures are fun to begin with. They've just got some issues. But I do hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you leave a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel, and I will talk to you all in another video, another post, another time.